What's up? Professor Wergelius here. We are moving on to the next lecture. We are on lecture 7. We're going to talk about transitions and animation. Now, before we move on to the next lecture, make sure you've saved all your code. You can do a save all, or you can make sure there's no little white dot on the side. Just make sure everything's saved. On lecture 7, we have slides and code. We're going to start out with the slides, and then we're going to download the code and get that open. So first, let's open up the slides. I recommend you to open it up and take down notes. You can also view it from the browser by clicking this little magnifying glass. We're going to start with the first slide. And remember, we're talking about CSS transitions and animations. Now, what is a transition? You're going to want to know the definition. A CSS transition allows you to change property values smoothly from one value to another over a given duration. Now, that is key. You have to specify the duration. Now, here's an example. Let's say I do a mouse over. There's a little div there. I do a mouse over. It now moves larger, moves over to the other side of the screen, and changes a different color. So I'm doing some effect on that div. I hover over it, so I move the mouse. I hover over it. Now it's expanding, changes colors, and maybe moves to the other side of the page. That's what a transition is used for. Now, how can I use this CSS transition? To create this transition effect, you must specify two things. One, the CSS property you want to add an effect to, and two, the duration of the effect. Note, if the duration is not specified, the transition will have no effect because the default value is 0. So let's say I do a hover over, it'll just jump. It'll just jump and it won't have that smooth effect like we talked about earlier. You'll see here, it changes the property value smoothly. That's a key word. It's not, oh, hover over, boom. It's hover over, a nice slow, and then it changes the effect on that property. So if I don't specify the duration, the transition will have no effect. That's a test question. Okay, I'm going to give you a transition. I'm going to ask you what happens to the transition. You'll want to know if I didn't specify the duration, nothing's going to happen. The following example here shows a div that's 100 by 100 pixels that's also red. Okay, so it's going to start out red, and now I'm going to specify the transition. Now, transitions differ based off browsers. We saw that with our CSS3 properties that we're using. You'll see the dash here, so maybe I need to use WebKit, which was for Safari and Chrome, also Opera. We also have Mozilla. In this example, the div element has also specified a transition effect for the width property with the requirement, which is a duration of 2 seconds. So the transition will start, let's say, at 100 pixels, and it's going to change to some width that's going to happen over 2 seconds. So the transition effect will start when the specified CSS property, the width, in this example, changes value. So how do I do that? Well, the most common one is a hover. So let's use a new value for the width property when the user mouses over the div element. If they hover over the div, I'm going to change the width to 300 pixels. So here I hover over this red div. It's 100 by 100, which is a perfect square. You'll see a transition takes effect, so it's going to go nice and smoothly to 300 pixels. It's going to gradually change to the new width, and it will gradually change back to the original style. So if I hover over the mouse, it's going to gradually go to 300. If I take the mouse off, it's going to gradually go back down to 100. So it's a smooth effect over 2 seconds. And you'll see that happening here. Here's my square. Here's 150 pixels. Here's 300 pixels. Now, one bad thing about transitions is they don't work across all browsers. You'll see that note down here. So this example does not work in Internet Explorer 9 and earlier versions. Now, that may have updated, but the bad thing with transitions is you're going to want to make sure the user is using the correct browser. Now, we can change several property values, and we'll talk about that in the next video.